Love God with all your heart and soul and mind. That's the greatest commandment. And the second is like unto it. Love your neighbor as yourself. I don't usually begin a sermon with statistics, but this morning I feel that I must. As of the 1st of May, the first of this month, there have been 184 mass shootings so far in 2023. A mass shooting is defined by the FBI as a single incident in which 4 or more people are killed. There have been 248 deaths from mass shootings in the last 4 months. And we are on track in 2023 to set a record. And the fact is that mass shootings account for only about 1% of the gun violence and death in this country. 1%. As of May 1st, 14,000 people have died by gun violence of all kinds. And here is the saddest fact. Suicides are the majority of those gun violent deaths. If we're not killing each other, we're killing ourselves. This is such a sad, horrific commentary on the state of the soul of our nation. And while I'm deeply concerned for the soul of the nation, this morning, I'm more deeply concerned for our souls. I'm concerned for the souls of people of faith. We've been forced to face the reality that we may not be safe when we gather in our places of worship and in any public service gathering. In fact, places of worship seem to be targets for gun violence. But my main concern is not for our physical bodies. It is for what I feel as our diminishing spirits and our closing hearts. After each horrific shooting, we come to Sunday service, we lift up the horror of what has happened. We lift up the victims in our sharing and joys and sorrows, and then we leave the church, and it's business as usual until the next mass shooting, which we know is coming. Only there is no longer business as usual. We live in a nation with so many levels of hate that we're losing hope. It's overwhelming us. We feel helpless in the face of it all. Our instinct is to bury the pain and confusion, bury it somewhere deep within our psyches. But there's nowhere to hide. We remain haunted. We're haunted because we know there will be another shooting. The Sunday morning after the Allen, Texas mall massacre a few weeks ago, which occurred, as you may recall, on a Saturday, I went to church feeling very heavy, very tired, and very unsettled. And I know I wasn't the only one. At the beginning of the service, as usual, we talked about the continuing senseless tragedy of these shootings. And we talk about this at the beginning of the service every time, and the words are beginning to seem rote to me. And I'm sure this same scenario played out in churches across the country. But I didn't need service as usual that Sunday. But that's what happened. After those initial prayers, we moved on to the service as planned. I needed to mourn and pray and grieve with people in my community. I needed to hold them as they held me in this tragedy. I needed the comfort of my community. Now, I'm sure moving on with the rest of the service was comforting to many people. That's just what people needed. And I've been there, I've needed that. It's like, I can't deal with it, I can't think about it, it's just too painful. I was one of the first people to come out of the narthex, into the narthex, out of service. And there was a woman, a friend but not a close friend, who was standing over in the corner, and she was clearly not okay. And so I went over to her and I said, "Are you all right?" And she said, "No, I'm not all right. But if I talk about it, I'm afraid I'll melt down." And I invited her, if she wanted to share what was bothering her. And through tears, she said, "My family lives in and around Allen, Texas. And I have been on the phone and on Facebook all yesterday and all this morning, finding out who's safe. Have we accounted for everybody?" And she said, on top of that, "I have a trans nephew who lives in Texas. And he's told me how afraid he is because of all of the anti-LGBTQ plus rhetoric and the anti-trans legislation that is happening all across the country." She sobbed and she said, "I'm so afraid. I'm afraid I am losing my country. I am losing hope that this will ever be different." We grieved together, and when it was time to part, she said, "Thank you for being willing to hold my grief with me. How can we as people of faith move so quickly on with business as usual in this continual carnage? The continual murder of random people haunts, mass murder of random people haunts our individual and collective consciousness, and every breaking story floods us with new grief and new fear and new anger. Why do we not take the time to collectively grieve, to cry out to God in lament? Why do we not take the time to hold one another in collective grief? I fear we're becoming numb. I fear we're becoming paralyzed. I feel helpless, and we begin to ignore the pain. Our pain, first we ignore our pain, and then we ignore the pain and plight of others. We turn away from deep, deep empathy and emotional and spiritual connection with people who have suffered the most because it is too painful for us. But Jesus tells us these are our neighbors and we are to love them. And if we love them, shouldn't we be willing to share their pain? If we lose the capacity to connect deeply with ourselves, we cannot open our hearts to connect deeply to other people, and especially to the families who have lost loved ones, the mothers, the fathers, the siblings, the children, dear God, the babies. We can't imagine the terror of children locked in their classroom, trembling in fear, listening to rounds of ammunition go off, watching their friends, their little friends, fall onto the floor. We can't even fathom that. We can't hold that, but this is what is happening. We must be willing to emphasize with the people in those malls and stores who ran and hid anywhere they could find, broom closets, wherever. They searched frantically to get out of the way of the bullets. We have to connect our hearts to the people in the synagogues and churches who fall to the floor, crawling under the pew, and they don't dare flinch, lest the next round be for them. These are our neighbors. And yes, we must grieve for the shooter, not just because we are called to do so by virtue of our faith, but because somewhere in this person's misguided, misdirected life, they have suffered such deep pain that it laid the ground for their actions. Even the perpetrator of the carnage is our neighbor. At the very least, we should send thousands and thousands of people affected by gun violence as pure a prayer as we can, as often as we can. Not just for a few minutes on a Sunday morning. We must even be willing to pray for the congressional lawmakers, state leaders whose souls have shriveled to something so hard and small as to be barely detectable. But we have to send regenerative love to soften their hearts, help them find their souls. Because if we don't, this is going to go on. And of course, I lost where I was. We have to feel all this. We have to weep for them. We have to weep for ourselves. We have to weep for this country. We will not be moved to do all that we can possibly do to stop this violence if we keep trying to push the pain away. And yes, it's overwhelming and it's infuriating and it's insane, the willful ignorance and political gamesmanship that's going on. And we keep hearing the mantra from those who fan the flames of carnage. It's not about guns, it's about mental health. But it's absolutely about guns, and it's absolutely about the lack of mental health treatment in this country. It's not just about individual mental health. It's as if the entire nation has suffered a psychotic break. I don't care what political party with which we're affiliated. I don't care how law-abiding a person we are. When laws like the Second Amendment are the instrument of murder, the law must be changed. And as followers of Jesus, we are not Second Amendment people. We are Second Commandment people. We love our neighbors as we love ourselves. I can hear you all, I can see you going, oh my goodness. Could this preacher be even more of a downer? Please, Lord, make it stop. Let the sermon be over. Well, we're coming to that place. But I'm going to leave you with hope. The good news is that if we stop guarding and protecting our hearts, if we let our hearts break wide open, then there is room for God to come in. The divine spark lives within all of us, and when we push the suffering of other people out of our awareness, we are pushing God out of our awareness. The second commandment cannot be separated from the first greatest commandment. Love God with all our hearts and souls and minds. If we can just let go of the fear and step out in faith, we'll be able to commune with the infinite, the source of light and light. We'll be able to commune with God, and God is love. God is the well that we must go to again and again and again, and as many times as is necessary to replenish our souls and our hearts. From this place, from our place in God, we can find the capacity to weep with the world, and that weeping is an integral part of the process of helping to heal the world. It is from the greatest commandment that we find the collective strength to deal with whatever lies ahead. We are here for one another. We are second commandment people only because we are first commandment people. God's voice can still be heard in the midst of this chaos and suffering. God's voice can still be heard. Today, let's open our hearts and let love in. Let's open our hearts and let our neighbor in. Let's open our hearts and let our own pain in. Let's open our hearts and let God in. Amen.